Hello, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar, Going, Gone Global, the Global CBPR System. Today, we're going to discuss the cross-border privacy rule system. First, I want to introduce myself and also my speaker. We can go to the next slide, please. I am Donna Frazier, Senior Vice President of Privacy Initiatives here at BBB National Programs. In my role, I oversee all of our privacy programs, which include our child and teen-directed programs, including our COPPA Safe Harbor program under KRU, everything included there to our global privacy division, which includes the CBPR program, which we will discuss today. In addition, we have several emerging programs in the digital health space, connected cars, and AI. Today, I am joined by Shannon Coe, Director of Global Data Policy at the U.S. Department of Commerce's International Trade Administration. In her capacity there, Shannon leads a team that focuses on policy issues affecting cross-border data flows that support international trade, including multilateral, such as APEC, the OECD, G20, and the G7. Shannon leads for the U.S. in the Global Cross-Border Privacy Rules Forum and is the current forum chair. She was a key member of the team negotiating the EU-U.S. and Swiss Privacy Shield frameworks and led the implementation of the programs. And prior to joining ITA, Shannon was an international trade and corporate attorney. So Shannon, thank you so much for joining us today. We can go to the next slide. So just very briefly, for those of you who are not familiar with who BBB National Programs is, we are the home of industry self-regulation, where consumers turn to find businesses to trust. Our privacy compliance programs help support businesses to comply with international data privacy requirements in the EU, UK, and Switzerland under the respective data privacy framework agreements. And as I mentioned earlier, we also help companies comply with COPPA requirements through our COPPA Safe Harbor program, and in the teen space through TAP. And again, we have several emerging privacy programs, as well as our entire advertising division. So we can go to the agenda slide, please. So here is today's agenda, a quick summary of what we'll discuss today, global data privacy updates, followed by an overview of the cross-border privacy rules program. We'll transition to discussing the transition between the APEC CBPR program to the Global CBPR program. And then we'll conclude with how the CBPR framework benefits businesses and the role of accountability agents, of which BBB National Programs is one. And as we go along, if you have questions, there's a question box that you can enter your questions into, and we'll certainly take questions throughout, and we'll save time at the end as well. So we can go to the next slide. Thank you. So before we kind of dive into today's topic, I want to set the stage, kind of where we are with data flows and the importance of them globally. And Shannon, please, before we even get to our Q&A, I invite you to please jump in and opine along the way. If I misstate anything, if you want to add anything, please do so. So the IAPP created this map that you see. All that green stuff shows how many jurisdictions have a regulatory regime or laws in place to govern cross-border data flows. And given the data-driven nature of the economy, from whether it's e-commerce, shopping, interconnectivity of the internet, securing data flows, all of this is an important part of securing the global economy. And what we wanted to really highlight here is that obviously this can be extremely challenging to keep up with all the laws and nuances, no matter where you are and no matter where you sit in your organization. As we know, privacy requirements can vary by country and even by state, as we've seen here in the U.S. And in case anyone's keeping track, I think we're close now to 20 state privacy laws, and maybe by the end of this webinar, we'll be at 21, who knows. Domestically, data flows have been kind of taking center stage when we look at the reauthorization of Section 702 of FISA, the Data Privacy Framework Program, which we affectionately call DPF, which is administered by the Department of Commerce. You also have President Biden's executive order on AI. Even as we consider, again, this growing patchwork of close to 20 different state consumer privacy laws that are now in the books. So Shannon, I'm going to, toss the first question to you. With this important background context, the International Chamber of Commerce has found that data transfers could contribute to an estimated $11 trillion within the next year based on current trends. In your role at the U.S. Department of Commerce and ITA, can you please share, why you think multilateral and bilateral data privacy agreements between countries all over the world can enhance and streamline this important exchange of data in the digital market? It's a long-winded question, but I know that you know the answer.
Well, thank you, Donna. Thanks for having me here today. So in the International Trade Administration where I work, we've been actively engaged in the data and privacy policy space for many years as an important trade issue, going all the way back to the first bilateral arrangement we established with the European Union in 2000, an agreement that was the U.S.-EU Safe Harbor Framework, a previous iteration of the now DPF, which we can, what I want to share from this extensive experience in this policy space is that I really see two key issues that have led to the need for cooperation with our international partners on data privacy. The first is from a trade and regulatory perspective. As you noted in your introduction, many countries regulate the processing of personal data. And this regulation can result in trade barriers, of course, either through the direct imposition of restrictions on data transfers, or even just by virtue of each country having their own framework for data regulation that makes cross-border compliance costly and even very difficult. The second issue that we see is related to trust. The absence of trust has long been recognized as a barrier to the potential and opportunities of the digital economy. Going back to, for example, the APEC privacy framework, which we endorsed in 2005, we noted that the lack of consumer trust and confidence in the privacy and security of online transactions and information networks is one element that may prevent member economies from gaining all of the benefits of e-commerce. So even way back then, we recognized how important trust was, and it's even more so today. So promoting trust in the digital ecosystem, including through the promotion and protection of personal data and privacy, it's a key commitment of the United States and our partners to advance a positive vision for the internet and digital technology. And you can see this in various efforts from the administration, for example, as we set forth in the Declaration for the Future of the Internet. So here's where cooperation with international partners comes in. By working together, we can promote interoperability and trust, both of those things, to support data flows that underpin business operations, innovation, and trade. So an example of that, you already mentioned, Donna, is the EU-U.S. data privacy framework that we established last year. Department of Commerce worked with our U.S. interagency colleagues and EU counterparts to successfully negotiate the DPF, and that agreement facilitates bilateral data flows between the EU and U.S. And today, over 2,800 companies are signed up and benefit from that program. But we are also focused and committed to multilateral frameworks that are interoperable and globally scalable. And that's why we helped lead the establishment of a global cross-border privacy rules, or CBPR Forum, in 2022 with our 8 other partners from the APEC CBPR system. And promotion and expansion of the global CBPR system is a key part of our strategy to establish interoperable frameworks to facilitate cross-border data flows and promote data privacy. For that long-winded answer, but to your question, but just to give you sort of a full picture of the work that we're doing and why it's so important from a trade and commerce perspective.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you so much. And I think, obviously here at BBB National Programs, trust is part of the conversation. I don't think we have a conversation with anybody where the word trust doesn't come up. And I don't know how companies and organizations can operate without that being part of their KPIs, part of their mission today, right? I mean, I don't know how you build your consumer base without trust. And also, it's not just about businesses to consumers, right? It's not just B2C, it's B2B. And first parties being able to trust their third parties. Trust is definitely something that these frameworks can help establish and create a foundation for, and really create checks and balances between entities with regards to trust. So I don't think anyone should be taking it lightly at all. So we can go to the next slide. And really, how can global entities kind of reconcile these differences? And we've kind of outlined a few ways that companies and organizations with global presence can address these regional differences separately. And although the solutions outlined are ways they can be addressed, they can be, resource-intensive measures. But Shannon, given how many different U.S. states and international privacy laws exist today, how do you see the value of a uniform baseline like CBPR as helping companies navigate compliance within the patchwork?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the way that the global CBPR system is established, it's multilateral, and it provides for a uniform baseline of data privacy and protection requirements by identifying commonalities among different systems. And then those commonalities apply to all organizations that certify or voluntarily participate. And they are all certified and complying with the same requirements. So this improves interoperability between jurisdictions with different laws. Now, of course, CBPRs does not displace domestic requirements. So to the extent you're operating in a jurisdiction that has participates in CBPRs as well, there may be additional requirements that a company or that you would have to comply with if you're operating in that jurisdiction. But we see that there is significant value in governments working together to identify commonalities, even if they're not 100%, even if there's something less than 100%. There's a significant value in that broad swath of commonalities from a cost perspective, a compliance perspective, but also in promoting better privacy outcomes.
Great. So I think we can go to the next slide, which kind of gives a global CBPR program overview. As you've alluded to, this, the CBPR system was originally created by members of the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation countries, the APEC countries, to really streamline and strengthen data flows between those participating economies. There was realization of the business interests that data flows help to promote, obviously trust being one of those, right? And they wanted to really ease this with a universal standard that they could all agree upon. And this standard that we're talking about provides reassurances that we've already talked about and alluded to here, that participating companies, economies, and the companies with the certification would be meeting a uniform set of standards governed by, core 9 principles. Currently, the 9 participating countries in the CBPR system, we should say, are Taiwan, Japan, Singapore, the Philippines, Australia, Canada, Mexico, obviously the U.S., and South Korea. And I know that we have at least one associate member currently now under Global CBPR, which is the UK. It's a voluntary certification-based program that companies in participating countries can sign on to. Participating businesses can certify as a data controller, as a data processor, or both, depending on the activity that they engage in. And CBPRs can really be a solution that helps to cut across, again, all these different requirements that we're talking about, whether, it includes kind of contracts, engagement of processors, processors. I know that, when we're dealing with companies, we're often dealing with the procurement departments who are dealing with some of these vendors and things like that. And ultimately, the goal here, as you stated, really is to promote interoperability, bridge this data privacy regulatory approaches, the various approaches around the world now, periodically review these privacy standards and promote jurisdictional cooperation. So Shannon, I have two questions. Let's start with, it is a voluntary, CBPR is a voluntary program for businesses. But can you share more about, what your vision is to support businesses, regulators, and consumers through the program?
Yes, thank you. Now, Donna, some of these you have already touched upon, but allow me maybe just to elaborate a little bit further, because the CBPR system certification offers multiple benefits for companies, for regulators, and for consumers. So maybe starting first with companies, and I think you already mentioned this about the being a tool to demonstrate that you are complying with internationally recognized data protection principles. To consumers, you mentioned B2B, to your business partners. This is an important tool, especially I would say in the U.S., for example, where we have sectoral laws, we have different state laws. This is an accessible tool that U.S. companies can use to show their international partners, hey, I'm doing the right thing. I have a mature and comprehensive privacy program. It improves compliance also as well, with obviously for all the governments that are participating and regulators, that we have agreements around what is required regarding compliance for data privacy and protection. We see that there's great potential for particular benefits for smaller companies, for example, and helping to streamline compliance, and which can be costly and burdensome for small companies that have fewer resources, but also in providing a roadmap for showing what a comprehensive privacy and mature privacy program should, the core essential elements, what that should contain. And I would say, I mentioned also regulators are quite, I would say, enthusiastic about certification programs, because you have that verification. A third party has checked a business's program and said, yes, you are meeting the requirements. It's also a force multiplier for enforcement actions, of course, surfacing significant issues, and it can also add additional tools for consumers to have their problems and complaints addressed. So there's a lot of aspects of the system for that, provide lots of benefits for the stakeholders beyond just governments, beyond regulators, but all the participants.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know recently we've had several conversations here at the organization with companies who find value in certification, particularly CBPR, as they're trying to get more resources and funding for their internal privacy programs, right? And the value in saying to their C-suite and saying to their board that they're making an investment in a third-party verification, a third-party certification, as another, one of those suspenders and belts, right, that companies need to have. But that is now becoming part of the conversation as folks are trying to, I think, make the case as to why this matters, and in trying to get that funding internally to continue to operate their internal privacy programs. I think it's hugely instrumental. And part of that conversation also leads to the question that you and I have been dealing with, for several years now, which is, yes, this is voluntary, but the notion that CBPR lacks teeth, right? We know is not true. There's enforcement under CBPR that is extremely impactful. So can you speak more about what that enforcement of CBPR looks like?
Yes, thank you. It is an often sort of repeated misconception of how the program works, because in fact, as you know, enforcement and accountability are key parts of the system and how it works. So on enforcement, I already touched on this a bit, but the program requirements when a company, it's voluntary, but once a company signs up to comply and be certified, those requirements are enforceable in the jurisdiction where they are certified. How this is foundational actually in how countries join to participate in the CBPR system, because as part of that process, the jurisdiction has to submit to all the other members how, in fact, those CBPR certification requirements are enforceable against companies that are certified in their jurisdiction. And there is some flexibility on that. So, for example, actually, I'd say most of the CBPR members have comprehensive privacy laws, and they basically map the privacy requirements to the CBPR certification requirements. In the United States, we actually rely on the Federal Trade Commission's Consumer Protection Authority, but the results are the same, meaning that they are enforceable however a jurisdiction gets there. So a key element, for a jurisdiction to participate is to demonstrate that to the satisfaction of other members. On accountability, again, already touched on this a little bit. Third-party verification is obviously, sort of the premier way of demonstrating accountability, having an independent assessment of your program and saying we have verified this. Also, there's the accountability agents monitoring,
right.
Monitoring that companies are adhering, receiving and investigating complaints from consumers, and also in worse case situations where a company is not complying and there is a violation of law, can actually surface those issues to regulators. So, just sort of at a high level, there are a number of key pieces of the system that underpin that enforcement and accountability are key elements of how the system works.
Right. As you've laid it out there, what you're essentially saying is that this system, there are checks and balances, right? It's not as simple. No one's rubber stamping somebody and just moving you, along. There are checks and balances to get the certification. There are checks and balances once you've certified, right? And I think what's key, and we see this, both here and abroad, is that these commitments that companies make in their privacy policies, right? These public-facing commitments that they make have to actually mean something, and they have to be doing something behind the scenes, right? And I think this framework lays out very succinctly, and we'll talk about this in the next slide, what these core principles are, what the commitments are, and what the expectations are. You're creating expectations. And I think that's key, right? That's really important. How are you fulfilling those expectations?
That's right.
So we can go to the next slide where we talk about kind of the core principles that are part of the foundation, the program requirements for CBPR. And I'll let people read these on screen. We'll leave them up for a few minutes as we go through our next questions. And these principles align with the GDPR principles and the OECD's guidance for cross-border data transfers. And they address, again, as we've been saying, these vital components of kind of cultivating the mindset on how to approach, the handling of personal data. And obviously it helps to address these internal, cultural, and external relations in both B2C and B2B, as we've been saying. So Shannon, can you share more about the 9 underlying principles and how the requirements kind of meet the objectives of the principles?
Yeah. So these principles will probably look familiar to many folks who are watching today. These are principles that are found in the Global CBPR Privacy Framework that was based on the APEC Privacy Framework that was That was based on the 1980 OECD privacy framework before that, which goes back to the earliest days in the 1970s when we developed the Fair Information Practice Principles here in the US. These principles have been reflected in various international instruments and are now reflected in privacy laws around the world. So they will, as Donna, as you noted, these are principles that and common things you would find in GDPR and many other privacy laws. What the CBPR system does uniquely is takes these principles and operationalizes them. For each principle, we pull out in the CBPR program requirements what actions a company has to take specifically to satisfactorily demonstrate the principles. Those are currently broken out into 50 program requirements. So for each of the principles, there will be a list of specific requirements that a company has to demonstrate in order to be certified. And this is really helpful because it actually provides this clear and very practical roadmap for giving meaning to these, long-standing, commonly sort of found high-level principles that are found around the world.
Yeah, and we've talked about, how certifications help companies, and I think maybe I want people to understand that this applies to both the large multinational companies as well as small and medium-sized businesses, SMEs or SMBs. I'd like to focus a little bit more on what role the certs can play in helping the smaller companies develop, kind of a comprehensive global privacy program, because I think we take for granted that it's only the large companies that are using CBPR, but it can be used by the small to medium-sized businesses. So for the sake of those in our audience, let's talk a little bit briefly about how the certifications can help them develop a comprehensive global privacy program.
Yeah, no, and I've somewhat touched upon this already, the sort of idea of having a roadmap. I think especially for small companies that maybe, privacy is an element, but it's not the main bread and butter. So you don't have a privacy expert on staff or maybe you don't even have a legal team. So these principles or concepts or what a mature privacy or comprehensive privacy program should look like might not, you might not be aware of that. So having this type of structure, this framework where you work through an accountability agent, and actually, Donna, you would speak more to this, better to this than I would, sort of the process you go through is an iterative process. There's a questionnaire that the company applying for certification would fill out. How do I meet all the requirements? And then that is assessed by the accountability agent. It's often, again, I don't want to speak for, you would speak better to the process of the work you do, but it would then be a back and forth where you're not, sufficiently demonstrating this. You need to do more or, provide more information or do something different. So it's a real, I think, again, going back to this idea of a roadmap. And I think also here, there's another important component, which is this is a government-backed certification that, companies can only participate in if their government has joined the forum and is participating. There is an assurance sort of built in there that, hey, I'm, following best practices, or there's been some government role that the regulator is involved in sort of giving that assurance about, am I doing the right things to comply, etc. And so, again, sort of emphasizing some of the points I raised already, compliance costs and You know, sort of the more value you can get out of one process, the markets that it covers obviously will lower costs and make things.
Yeah, absolutely. So we can go to the next slide where we've kind of already touched on all of this, the benefits, the benefits of CBPR. So I won't do a deep dive here, but one thing I will point out is that as we have been doing this as an accountability agent, one thing that we're really finding is that companies, and this really, again, this may apply right now to the large multinational companies who find themselves with, you know, in some instances, with these really large companies, hundreds of vendors to manage. And that, you know, we should talk about PRP and CBPR in a second, but that this is really a great tool for vendor and third-party risk management, allowing companies that, you know, may operate as data controllers and use a lot of companies who are their processors and sub-processors. So again, we've talked about the B2B value. And I think for the small and medium-sized companies, as they're growing and engaging with more third-party vendors, this can help them, right? This can help create trust and confidence. And I think ultimately what we all want is this, you know, this economy where everybody feels like, okay, we're all working together and we can trust each other, and this is all benefiting us as a business entity, right? We're building trust with consumers, whether it's consumer facing or it's behind the scenes. That's ultimately what we want is this economy and everyone who's kind of touching this data to be trusted. So we can go to the next slide, unless Shannon, you want to add anything there.
Well, really, I just want to emphasize this vendor due diligence in particular, because I think you know, the PRP, the data privacy, or sorry, data processor certification actually has a lot more value than I think, and is not as emphasized as the CBPR system. So and you know, again, sort of just emphasizing, Donna, what you already said, this can be a really important tool in demonstrating trust and also cutting costs, I think, at the same time for vendors, and then those companies that have lots of vendors. And I have heard countless stories from companies about, like, Donna, I think you said hundreds. I've heard of thousands of vendors, and those companies that work with those processors have these legal requirements to ensure that those processors can be trusted. There's a real value in being able to say, oh, you're certified, instead of doing an individual questionnaire or some other kind of individual due diligence processes, which is how many companies, as I understand, do it now. So if you were able to hold yourself, and then sort of on the flip side, on the vendor side, you could hold yourself out to each of the companies that you provide services to, as I have been certified. And we hear a lot about this from our stakeholders and companies, that this is actually a really key part of what the CBPR system offers, that we emphasize more and more because of the legal liabilities associated with processing. So anyway, I agree with everything you said, and just I wanted to put a further emphasis on that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And it's, you know, as this slide shows, people may be familiar, they've seen our CBPR seals, and you have our CBPR and our PRP, and then you have our VPP, which is a program that we created that's based on the PRP. It kind of mirrors that, but it's only intended for those data processors that are outside the U.S. versus those that are inside the U.S. And we could talk later on about how this may all, you know, seals may change. So we can go to our next slide, which is really talking about, you know, going from APEC to global. So this is kind of an overview of the timeline of how we got from where we were to where we are now. And we're currently in this kind of transition phase. So Shannon, as an APEC participating economy and being part of the APEC CBPR Forum and framework dating back, over a decade ago, can you kind of take us through what those initial conversations were like when you were all discussing, going global?
Sorry, I think I was on mute. Sorry.
Okay.
So yes, the CBPR system was originally an APEC program, and 9 APEC members had signed up to participate in the CBPR system. And the conversations for going global really started around the same time that we saw really a significant proliferation of data privacy and protection laws around the world, say like around 2018, 2019. And there was a growing need for a mechanism to establish interoperability. What it existed at the time, whether it was adequacy or standard contracts or, binding corporate rules, I think there was a need. There was a recognition that there was a need for something that was more scalable and multilateral. So we had this system established. It was operational. We had, certified companies, the whole thing set up, and we recognized that this was an opportunity to actually take it out of the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation, APEC, which is the regional group where it was started, and then make it global. We wanted to allow, certainly on behalf of the United States, when we were engaging globally on these issues, we heard from partners outside of APEC, well, we're interested, but we're not in APEC, so we can't join, come back when this is something we can do. Right. So it was really recognizing the changing global landscape and the need for such a multilateral tool based on cooperation that really propelled us forward to the Global Forum in 2022.
So, a lot has been happening, and as you know, the U.S. is still working on passing a federal data privacy bill. You can opine if you like on the latest discussion draft of APRA, but in absence of that, can you talk about how, without having that law at a federal level here in the U.S., CBPRs can really help fill those gaps that we don't have?
Yeah. So I will just say at the outset that it is up to Congress to pass a federal data privacy law, and I would not be able to comment on what such a law would look like or when it might pass, etc. But I think with respect to your question about how the CBPR system can help fill the gaps, I mean, sort of, repeating what I said earlier, the system is built around these commonly understood and recognized principles. And if you're CBPR certified, so in the US, if you're a US company and you are certified, you are held to those standards, those requirements, even where they exceed what's currently in place legally here in the US. So even in the absence of a federal law, if you are certified to the CBPR program requirements, you are accountable, and those commitments are legally enforceable against you by virtue of the FTC's enforcement authority. These, again, sort of going back to what I noted earlier, these are common across different jurisdictions. They can help bridge gaps between US and any jurisdiction's laws. And then also, finally, there are actually some of our members have recognized concrete regulatory benefits of the CBPR certification as a transfer tool. For example, in Singapore and Japan, and even Bermuda, which is not currently a member of the CBPR Forum, but they have unilaterally recognized CBPR certification to facilitate transfers under their law.
So we also saw here in the U.S., I believe it was Tennessee, in their state privacy law, right, made reference to, at the time, APEC. That's
correct. Yes.
And how did Tennessee kind of embrace this?
Actually, that's a very good question. I understand that some folks in the privacy space that are sort of aware of what's going on internationally are sort of bringing awareness of these international programs that the federal government is involved in, as state laws are considering their own privacy laws and certifications, et cetera. And so I think it was a result of that.
Yeah. I mean, I have to imagine that if we were to pass something here in the U.S., that these same principles that we've been talking about, all of this would hopefully, I mean, as I've read drafts, the principles seem to be, as you said, very common, right, across countries, across frameworks. I mean, it's almost like we're talking about FIPS, right? I mean, these are kind of basic principles. So I have to imagine that if we were to pass a federal consumer privacy law, that it would complement what already is laid out in the Global CBPR Forum. But, and I don't know if you agree with me on this or not, but if it didn't, I still think that the CBPR framework would fill whatever gaps we're missing, right? I think it's nimble enough to do so.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. The CBPR framework is very flexible, which again is what allows jurisdictions with different frameworks to participate. We agree on the commonalities, and then each of us demonstrates how we get there in our own way. I mean, at the end of the day, there are lots of commonalities around principles, but at the same time, there are lots of differences. There's differences in language used to explain concepts which are similar. There's differences in sort of specific when you get down in the details. So what the CBPR system does is we all agree on this is the common requirements. How the US gets there is through consumer protection. How Japan gets there is through their privacy law, et cetera, et cetera. So we agree on the outcome. And sort of how you get there is up to your own framework. So yes, the flexibility is another key component of what makes this system scalable, globally scalable.
Right. Can we go to the next slide so we can kind of talk about the types of businesses that should be joining the cross-border privacy rules system? It's designed to be complementary to data protection laws in other jurisdictions, as we've been saying. And one of the great things about it, again, is that it cuts across all these sectoral laws, but it's broad, it's nimble, right? So that means that CBPRs are open to all kinds of business, whether it's for-profit, nonprofit, financial institutions, health services, and everything else in between. And that's kind of what we're seeing. And it's, again, great for organizations that are looking to bolster, their privacy commitments, their privacy programs, those who have a large multinational presence, that this is key. This could be key for them. So in light of, the types of businesses that could join, and now that we've gone from APEC to global and to open up to businesses from other countries. So with the expansion underway, we've seen at least the UK, apply to become an associate member. So can you give us a sense of what interest from countries joining the Global Forum looks like? And maybe now's a good time to really talk about, well, what is an associate member versus, full-on member?
Yeah. So maybe I'll start with that.
Yeah.
issue first. So we're a brand new forum, just had our second anniversary. And in the 2 years of our existence, we have been working to set up the governance structure, et cetera, of the forum. To date, we have established the criteria and procedures for associate status. And as you noted, we already have our first associate in the United Kingdom. We also currently have several other applications which we are processing and hope to be able to make a announcement in the near term on some further new associates. Associates are it's less than full membership. You don't have voting rights, but jurisdictions that are keenly interested in the system, in the forum, and participating fully in our work, this is a good pathway to full membership and to start in the conversation. So full membership, on the other hand, would be when a jurisdiction signs up, demonstrates that their law, remember I mentioned the common requirements, that would be the process through which that jurisdiction would show how their law aligns with those requirements and makes the certification enforceable within their boundaries. And that process, we are in the process of finalizing the procedures for that. So in fact, we aren't currently open yet for full membership. But that is also imminent. I would say probably the best expression of interest in our work has been the biannual events, the workshops that the forum has held since our establishment. Mm-hmm. And I mentioned we've had 5 since we established in April of 22. Mm-hmm. And through those events, we have had representatives from over 40 different jurisdictions from all regions: Africa, the Middle East, Europe, Latin America, across Asia. And I would say, sort of given where we are in our structure and our governance and the interests and all that shows sort of the opportunities that the Global Forum and the Global CBPR presents for broadening and expanding global interoperability. So hopefully, again, we are going to be fully up and running with our membership process, and we will be processing more and more new participants in the system.
Yeah, I mean, I will say the last forum meeting that we had in Tokyo, was that April? I don't know what month we're in, so it wasn't
May. It was May.
See?
It was past. Yeah.
It was really interesting to see how many more countries were present, and minimally curious about this. But what do you think is really what's motivating countries? Is it the complex regulatory landscape? Is it the trust factor? Is it both of those things? Is industry gonna force this upon countries to just say, you know what, we need you industry need to find a way, to help countries kind of create, let's say, some sort of, uniform thing that we could point to while everybody else is kind of going crazy with all the different laws all over the world. What's the motivating factors here? What do you think are the motivating factors?
Everything that you said. There are a lot of motivating factors. Depend on which government, which stakeholders that you're talking to. That's actually been one of the most eye-opening things about going global, because now we're talking, in the context of, there aren't any regional restrictions or membership in other fora requirements. It's open. That the differences really vary. A lot of developing countries or countries with brand new privacy laws that are just now standing up a regulator, just now trying to develop implementing regulations, are interested in capacity building. folks who have been in this space for a lot longer, they want to know, how do you do it? Can you share best
Right.
practices? I think
Right.
there is a huge trust gap.
Yeah.
There's a huge misunderstanding among governments, among regulators about what privacy requirements are in different jurisdictions. I mean, I can say from the perspective of the United States, I mean, our system, is often mischaracterized. I hear the probably most frequent term I hear is Wild West, when in fact we have privacy laws dating back many years. And you noted the FIPS, which, we were, those privacy practices were developed here. But there's a lot of room for governments and regulators really to come together and understand better what our systems are, what we're doing. And then I think as well, there's a scalability issue. I think the prospect of negotiating bilaterally with every single trading partner is daunting at best. I think what I have seen, especially in these workshops where we bring all of the stakeholders together, it's not just government, it's not regulators, it's accountability agents, it's business, it's civil society. There's a real value in us sort of working together in this cooperative multilateral sense, and then having all of that stakeholder input. We just bring everybody all together at the same time, and let's, we have shared interests in a good outcome here.
Right.
How do we best get there? So there really a variety of things. Some governments are particularly concerned. They want, of course, see the need and the value of privacy, but they don't want to hinder innovation. We want to be part of the digital economy. We don't want to, cut off our innovation, that sort of thing. So all sorts of motivations. And when we get together, then you can see that, as I said, sort of this, all the stakeholders, cooperation, all this system can really facilitate and address each of those. Yeah,
no, absolutely. And I think in some of the conversations I had, especially with people from different countries in Africa, about this helping them build, the financial strength of their country, right? Being able to, they understand that how privacy impacts the economy and revenue and all that sort of stuff, right? So, I mean, it's really quite fascinating. All the different reasons as to why this is helpful and matters. So I know we're coming close to time, so I do want to talk briefly about, we talked about accountability agents. We can go to the next slide, please. And as I said, BBB National Programs is an accountability agent. We're not the only one. Each participating member economy has designated accountability agents that kind of help administer the certification for each jurisdiction. Before BBB National Programs, became an accountability agent, before we were actually certified, we had to administer, and before we were able to administer certifications, we had to go through an application process and be approved by the Joint Oversight Committee. Accountability agents, for those who are not familiar, are in charge of assessing whether or not an organization meets the program requirements adequately, right? And we talked about this, earlier in the hour. The certification process includes, when I say comprehensive review, I mean comprehensive. It is very detailed. It requires, a very close, deep dive on companies' policies, procedures, and the overall approach to handling personal data. So, and the way that we work with companies is, it is a lot of hand-holding. We're dealing with, different parts of companies' teams, because it's not always legal. Sometimes it's IT, sometimes it's, some other department that has the answers to some of these questions. But it's not just purely self-attestation. They have to actually provide evidence, so they can answer all the questions in the world. But what we're actually doing as accountability agents is saying, you need to show us the evidence of this. We need to see proof that this is what you say you're doing is what you're doing. And obviously we provide, feedback and recommendations on how to really, adhere to the program requirements so that they can hit that standard. So Shannon, my question for you is, how does Commerce and ITA work, in the Global Forum partner with accountability agents? And we talked about it a little bit, but you do a little bit of a deeper
dive. Yes, no, great question. Accountability agents are critical. We can't have companies become certified unless you have an accountability agent. And we work with accountability agents very closely. You mentioned in the United States, we have 4. In fact, the way that we approach establishing or supporting approval of accountability agents in the U.S. is it's a market-based approach. Anyone can apply. We don't do it on behalf of the government. It's a private sector. Basically, if an entity is interested in becoming an accountability agent, you would have to submit materials that show how you meet all the requirements. We would then verify that the application is complete, and then it would be put forward for all of the members to endorse. So that's one of the ways that the forum facilitates mutual recognition across all of the jurisdictions, is that each member has a say in which accountability agents are approved to give certifications. So there's that process, and that accountability agents have to come in every 2 years to demonstrate they're still meeting criteria, and there's a whole host of requirements you have to meet. And of course, we are happy and supportive of accountability agents' efforts to promote the certification uptake by companies, because again, this is a program that is established for the benefit of companies.
Right.
And so we want to help raise awareness. I would say probably one of the biggest challenges that we've identified in uptake to CBPRs is just companies don't know about it. And if you're a big company and you're in Washington, or you're going to, some of the major privacy events around the world, you might have heard of it. Otherwise, it's not as well known. So we try to get the word out there. And, and finally, just to say, as you mentioned, I'm the forum chair currently, and I regularly meet with all of the accountability agents. We work closely with you to ensure that all of the accountability agents across jurisdictions are getting the support you need, trying to help provide the information for companies that you need, answering questions, etc. So we work closely with you guys and rely on you guys to do the hard work of the issuing the certifications and monitoring, etc.
Absolutely. So I know we have 1 minute left, so I really want to get to what's most important, Shannon, which is if an organization wants to reach out to your team for more information or with questions, kind of what's the best way to do that? And then, I will give you the last word. We will share this slide. We'll provide additional resources. Of course, if anyone's interested in learning more, please reach out to us. If you're interested in joining the CBPR, please reach out to us. I'm happy to do that. But if someone wants to reach out to you, Shannon, and your team, how do they do that? What's the best way to do that?
Well, so first I want to highlight, in terms of information regarding the Global Forum, we do have a website, globalcbpr.org. That website has information, for example, about the approved accountability agents, including the ones in the U.S. And accountability agent has a link, so you can go. I would highly recommend for companies that are interested in becoming certified that you get in touch with an accountability agent, because they are the ones that can go, they're the ones who do that process. And I would direct you to them if you had job. But otherwise, we are in the process of updating that website, and it will be more dynamic and have a lot more information going forward. And I believe there's a way to contact me through the website.
Okay.
But I put out there.
Yeah, we'll put that information in the resources.
That's right.
Yeah, that we'll send out. So we'll provide the link and all that sort of stuff.
Perfect,
So I want to thank you so much for your insights today. I think this was a really helpful conversation for companies who are, either part of this, learning about it, curious about it, understand the value of it. I think we achieved our goal today in helping companies really understand what this is about and how this is a great tool to help navigate what's happening globally on the privacy landscape. So Shannon, as always, thank you so much for your time and your insights.
Thanks for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining us today.